Welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. In the following tutorial we're going to take a look at creating a navigation bar out of some web icons that we are going to make. So let's get started. Go here to File, hit New Document, width 400, height 100 pixels. Set the background contents to white. Hit OK. We've got our document here. I'm going to drag it down to here. Open it up a little bit, blow it up to 200% to make it easier for you to see. Now the first thing I'm going to do is select the background layer and double click my foreground swatch here and select one of these dark grays here and hit OK. And I'm just going to hit Alt or Option backspace. That's going to fill that background layer with that dark gray. The next thing I'm going to do is come up here to View and make sure my rulers are turned on. So you can just hit Command or Control R and that'll turn your rulers on. Now this document is 100 pixels tall. So we're going to click on the top ruler and drag a guide out and place it at the 80 pixel mark over here to the left when it comes to height. So you're going to see here. There we go. I've got a guide placed now at the 80 pixel mark. I've got my guides set to light blue so I can see them easily against this background. Alright, let's get started. Create a new layer. Double click the name. Name it Icon Base. Select the rounded rectangle tool. Make sure the radius here is set to 8 pixels up in your toolbar, and also make sure that you have it set to fill pixels, not a shape layer or paths. Hold the Shift key to make sure you're constraining it to a true square, and drag it out about that big. Now you don't see anything here because my foreground color is this background color. I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit so you can see what's going on. There we go. You can see that we have in fact created a shape. I've got the shape here and I'm going to apply a layer style to it quickly, and the layer style is first going to be a drop shadow, but this drop shadow is really just going to be an outer glow. We're going to change the color to white, and I'm going to uncheck global lighting and I'm going to change the angle to -90. I'm going to lower the opacity to about 50 and I'm going to change the blend mode to normal. I'm also going to reduce the distance to 2 pixels and increase the size to about 8. 8 looks good. And I'm also going to apply a gradient overlay. So I'm going to check gradient overlay. And I'm going to click into my gradient editor. I'm going to select this black handle and I'm going to make this a darker gray. Hit OK. I'm going to select the white handle. I'm going to make this a lighter gray. Just like that. Hit OK. Now we want the lighter gray to be on the bottom, so we can just hit reverse here, and that's going to place the lighter gray on the bottom and the darker gray at the top. Hit OK. Now we're going to hit Command or Control J 4 times. That's going to duplicate this layer 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like that. And I'm going to select the top layer here, hit V, which is going to switch me to my Move tool. Right there. And then hold down Shift and use my arrow keys to push this one all the way across the screen until I've got about the same amount of distance between this edge as I have over here at this edge. Once that happens, if I'm using Photoshop CS2, I can hold down Shift and select all 5 of these icon layers, and I'm going to come up here to Layer, Distribute, and hit Left Edges. This is going to distribute all of my icons here across the screen, all equally spaced. The last thing we're going to do with these icons is hit Command or Control G, which is going to group all 5 of those layers. I'm going to double click on the group name and I'm going to name this Icon Base. So I know that all of my icon bases are in here. I'm going to grab this group and drag it down to the new layer icon. That's going to duplicate the group. I'm going to open the group up and I'm going to, actually no, I'm not going to open the group up yet. I'm going to hit Command or Control T first. I'm going to transform it and then I'll open the group and get into layer styles. Command or Control T. That's going to free transform this, and up here in the toolbar you have a width and height percentage adjustments. I'm going to reduce the width to 85% of its original and the height as well to 85% of its original. So hit OK. Again, we're going to place these icons just like we did with the other one. We're going to hit V to move me to my Move tool. I'm going to shift this first icon over and place it in the center of this square. Go up to the top layer and do the same with the icon on that side. Just like that, that's squared. Select all 5 layers, go to Layer, Distribute, Left Edges. There we go, they are all placed. I'm going to select this layer, or icon base, excuse me, copy 5 layer. It's this one here. I'm going to double click into the layer styles. I'm going to get rid of the drop shadow And for the gradient overlay, I'm going to uncheck reverse so that it goes back to having the light gray on top and the dark gray on the bottom. Hit OK. Now we want to duplicate this layer effect over all the rest of these layers. It's really easy to do. Right click on the layer, hit copy layer style, click on icon base copy 6, shift click up to the top of the number of layers we have here. I'm going to right click and just hit paste layer style, and there you go. It quickly pastes all of those layer styles. I'm going to rename this group icon inner. So now we have the base of our icons set up here. I do see one thing I don't like though. I must not have adjusted these icons properly because this one here in the center, not centered. There we go. Okay, so we've got the intersection of our icons and the base section of our icons here created. The next thing we're going to do is create a shine for them. So I'm going to create a new layer and I'm going to name it shine. Whoops. Shine, there we go. And I'm going to grab the rounded rectangle tool again, and I'm going to pull a rounded rectangle down that just goes from the one edge of my inner icon to the other edge of it. I don't want to cover up this little frame now that we have going around this gradient. Okay, with that shine selected, I am going to go to gradient overlay. Actually, cancel that for a second. Make sure white is your foreground color. We're going to go back to gradient overlay. And in the gradient section, I'm going to hit foreground to transparent. I'm going to move the transparent slider back to about 70%. Don't worry about the white slider here. This is the top slider we're working with here, the transparency slider. Hit OK. We're going to lower the opacity to about 50%, maybe a little less. And now you can see we still have all this black in here, and that's because the original shape we drew was that dark gray. We can get rid of that by coming up here to blending options. Under the advanced blending section, there's this fill opacity slider. Reduce that to 0. And you can see we're left with our shine. I do want to come back into gradient overlay though. Open up my gradient editor again. And I want to pull that transparency back a little further. Just like that. Maybe reduce the opacity a little more. Hit OK. Just like that, we have our shine. We're going to hit Command or Control J 4 times. I'm going to grab this one, move it all the way over across my screen. Just like that. Shift click all of those layers. We're going to once again come into Layer, Distribute, Left Edges. And there we go. We've created the bases of all of these icons. I'm going to hit Command or Control G to group these shines. I'm just going to name this group Shines. Now we're going to start creating the icons, little graphics that are going to go into the center of each of these icons. Let's start with the home icon. I'm going to zoom way in on this first icon here to the far left so we can really see what we're doing. I'm actually going to create 3 layers because our home icon is going to be composed of 3 layers. I'm going to go to layer 1 and grab the rectangle tool. Hit D to make sure my colors are set to their default colors and set black as my foreground color. With the rectangle tool, make sure you have fill pixels selected. And we're just going to draw out a box just like that. Go up to layer 2. Again, in the shape tools, grab the polygon tool. Now make sure the polygon tool is set to 3 sides, and also make sure that here under polygon options, smooth corners is unchecked and star is unchecked. You don't want to have those set. It will give you all kinds of weird results. Hold the shift key down and now rotate your triangle till you have the flat section, there we go, on the bottom. So we can put these together here. There we go. Just like that. Switch to the move tool and now shift this over. Command or Control T. Make this box just a little bit narrower, not quite so tall. Just like that. Now I'm going to merge these 2 layers, so I'm going to select layer 2, which is the roof here, and I'm going to hit Command or Control E. That merges those together. You can see these are now both on one layer. And I'm going to hit Command or Control T to free transform them, and I'm going to move them down, and I'm actually going to widen it a little bit. Apply those changes, and center this roughly here in the center of this icon. I'm going to come to Layer Styles and apply a gradient overlay to this as well. We're going to create a new gradient for this. This gradient is going to be a pink to a dark red. Hit OK. And you can see our gradient there. Hit OK once again. Now on this layer 3, I'm going to use the rectangle tool. I'm just going to draw a door here for our house. Just like that. I'm going to select both of these layers and I'm going to group them. I'm going to name this group Home Icon. So that's the home icon. Let's move on to the gallery icon here, which is going to be the second button in our navigation bar. Create a new layer, and actually create two new layers. First thing we're going to do is grab the pencil tool. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to click up here. It's going to draw a straight line right up the middle of this button for me, because what I'm trying to do is just create a line going right down the center, and this line I'm going to lower the opacity to about 15, just like that. Now on layer 4, I want to create 4 little boxes. So I'm going to use my rectangle tool and I'm going to draw out a rectangle. I'm going to hit Command or Control J, and I'm going to hit V. That's going to switch me over to my move tool. I'm going to drop this rectangle down to about right there. I'm going to hit Command or Control E to merge these two layers. So now both of our rectangles are on one layer, and I'm going to hit Command or Control J to duplicate that. I'm going to hit V again and just shift these over toward the right, just like that. And I'm going to merge that layer. So now all of our rectangles here are on one layer. I am going to click on this little F icon here in the home icon layer. It's the layer style, whoops, that is affecting our home icon here. I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to click that F icon and I'm going to drag it up to my layer 4 here, which is my boxes. And you're going to see it's going to duplicate that layer style quickly right up to layer 4. I'm going to edit that layer style just slightly. I just want to angle this gradient a little, just like that. And there we go. We've got our gallery icon created. I'm going to shift click these layers and hit Command or Control G, and I'm going to call this gallery icon. One other thing I want to do is keep the shines group on top of our groups here. What that's going to do, whoops, I just dragged it into the gallery icon. You don't want to do that. There we go. When the shines are on top of all of your icons, you're going to see our shines are now affecting our little icons. So the shine is affecting the very top of the house and these upper gallery boxes here. We're going to come on to the third box here, which is the contact button. We're going to select the rectangle tool, and we are going to draw out a rectangle here. We're going to create another layer. We're going to grab the pencil tool. Actually, we're going to duplicate that layer style first. So I'm going to hit Alt, drag that F up, and there we go. The envelope, or what is going to be the envelope in a minute, is now affected by that layer style. We're going to come here onto layer 7, and using the pencil tool, we're going to draw the flap that an envelope has, just kind of roughly. And I'm going to come up here to Filter, Blur, and Blur. Just going to blur that ever so slightly and then reduce the opacity to about 50%. I'm going to group these layers, Command or Control G, and we're just going to call this envelope. There we go. And I'm going to create one new layer for this. I'm actually going to select that envelope group and hit Command or Control T and kind of tilt it on its side. Apply those changes. I'm going to hit layer 8 here, which is a blank layer as of right now, and I'm going to grab my line tool, which is hiding beneath the rectangle tool here, right there. Make sure the weight is set to 1 pixel and black is your foreground color. And I'm just going to draw some lines coming off the back of this envelope to imply some speed. Just like that. I'm going to select both of these layers. I'm going to shift them over. I'm actually going to, with both layers selected, or the group and the layer, I should say, selected, I'm going to hit Command or Control T to free transform them, and I'm just going to tip it up a little bit more. Apply those changes. Just like that. I'm going to lower the opacity of this layer 8 here, which I'm going to name lines actually, to make sure that I'm staying clear here and you know what I'm doing. So I'm going to select the lines layer and I'm going to reduce the opacity to 15%. Now one other thing I need to do this lines layer is apply a mask to it to get rid of the lines coming outside of our icon here. I can do that by coming into Icon Inner and just control clicking. This is the third icon in. You can see it places a selection around the inner icon. I've got my lines layer selected. I'm just going to hit the mask button, and it's going to mask it to that shape that I had selected. So now those lines are no longer going outside of it. Matter of fact, I'm going to unlink that mask from the layer, and I'm going to use my move tool here, and I'm going to, oops, make sure I select my envelope as well. I'm just going to move it over a little bit, just like that. So there we go. I'm going to group these two together actually, and just call it envelope icon, because that whole thing is our envelope icon. I'm going to move over to the next button, and the next button is going to be our FAQ button, and this one's going to be pretty simple. Just create one layer and grab the type tool and just type out a question mark. That question mark's a little too big. I'm going to double click on the little type icon here. I'm going to make these thumbnails a wee bit larger. Double click on that type thumbnail and reduce the size till let's try 36. 36 looks good. Check, just find a good font. This font here is going to work fine for me. I usually use something like Arial or Helvetica or one of the very basic fonts. When you start getting too fancy, the question mark's not really going to fit in with our clean-cut style navigation bar we're building here. So just find something that's pretty simple. Now here again, we are going to open up and copy up a layer style. So I'm going to holding down the Alt, or if you're on the Mac, Option, and I'm going to drag the little F icon. Drag it right up, just like that. And that's our FAQ icon. The last icon we're going to make is going to be the most complicated. This is going to be the network icon here for this navigation bar. And we're going to start out, well actually let me place this type layer into a group and just name it FAQ icon, just to get that out of our way. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to grab the pen tool. Now with the pen tool set to make paths, I'm going to click in the bottom right hand corner of this icon, and then I'm going to click again in the top left hand corner, and I'm clicking and holding, and I'm just going to pull out an arc that just runs just like that. I'm going to come over to my paths palette, and you can see I've got this work path here. I'm going to click and drag that down to the new paths button. That's going to save that path. I also want to duplicate this path, so I'm going to drag it down to the new paths button again, and I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, which is sitting right above the path tool, and I'm just going to make a selection around the top left hand side of this path. Now I'm working on path 1 now, or path 1 copy, excuse me, not path 1. I'm going to hit shift and press the down arrow key, and you can see it's changed my path. My path is now going to a lower point. So I'm going to duplicate this path, use my direct selection tool, select that same anchor point, hit shift and the down arrow key to do that again, and I'm going to repeat the whole process once more here, just like that. So you can see that I've got this path, but if I go up to that path, it's a slightly higher, and that path slightly higher, and that path is the highest. So I'm going to come back to my layers palette, make sure I have this layer 8 here selected, and I'm also going to make sure my brush tool is set to 1 pixel and 100% hardness, and I'm just going to stroke this path, stroke that path, stroke that path, and stroke that path, deselect the paths, and here in the layers palette I have all of these lines on one layer. I'm going to hit Command and Control J to duplicate that layer, and I'm going to hit Command and Control T to free transform the layer. Now if I right click on my free transformation here, I can go down to the bottom and hit and flip this horizontally or vertically. I want to flip this horizontally. Apply those changes by hitting that little check. Now hit Command and Control E to merge these two layers together. I'm going to open up my FAQ icon, and I'm going to drag up that layer style, just like that. And I actually want to edit this layer style just a little bit. Down in the gradient overlay, I want to make sure this is set to about 90. There we go, just like that. And we have our network icon. So there we go. We have all these buttons with all these icons in them. I'm going to group that network icon into its own group there, just to keep it out of the way. Now, the last thing we are going to do, well, actually we're going to do a couple little things, but the next thing we're going to do is put some text at the bottom of these buttons so people know what they're clicking on. I'm going to create a new layer. Actually, I don't even have to create a new layer. Just by using the type tool, it's going to automatically create a new layer for me. And I'm going to type out network. We're going to work with the network button here, even though I just put this type all the way on the other side of the screen. Network. Change the color of this type to white. There we go. Apply those changes. I'm going to zoom in on the network icon here. Double click the word network, and we're going to reduce the size to about 8 points. So you can see now the word is significantly smaller. I'm going to use a pixel font here. So either find a pixel font of your own or download one from any of the various free font sites out there. And we're going to use this pixel font right here. A pixel font is really just a very rough font, and when I use a pixel font, I'm usually only going to use it. Matter of fact, I do only use it when I'm working with something where the type is going to be very small and it still has to be legible. So I'm going to reduce this to 6 point here. And when you're working with a pixel font, you want to get rid of all the anti-aliasing. So this AA drop down menu, just set that to none. It's going to give you very sharp letters. I'm going to change the color of this type back to black and apply those changes. So we now have the word network at the bottom of our network button. I'm just going to duplicate that layer and move it over a little bit. Oh, you know what? One thing I want to make sure I do, when I create this word, I want to make sure I have my positioning or aligning here set to center. This is so when I retype the rest of the words, once I position them, they'll all be centered in their icon. If I were to align it to the left or to the right, when I select this word like this and type FAQs, what would happen is it would either be pushed off to the left-hand side or to the right-hand side, depending on which alignment I had chosen. So Command or Control J to duplicate that layer. Move over some. Double-click that T icon in your Layers palette. Contact. Command or Control J to duplicate it. Shift it over. Double-click that icon. Gallery. And then last but not least, Command or Control J once more. I'm just hitting V, which is the hotkey for my move tool, and I'm just shifting it right over. Double click that little icon again in your Layers palette and type out home. Alright, I'm going to select all this text. I'm going to hit Command or Control G, and I'm going to double click that layer, and I'm just going to call this labels, because those are all the button labels. Now, we're going to do two last things here. First of which is create a new layer right above the background layer. As you can see here, we got layer 9. Grab your rectangular marquee tool and make a selection that goes from about, just covers about half of your buttons as far from width to height, or from top to bottom, excuse me, width to height, from top to bottom. So you're going to make a selection that's about that size there, if you can see the size of my selection. And I'm going to come up here to select, and I'm going to hit feather, and I'm going to feather this by about 10 pixels. Hit OK, and I'm just going to fill it with white. So now we've got this glow behind our buttons. I want to reduce the opacity of that glow to about 75%. And let's make it a little lower. Let's try 50. There, 50 looks good. And one last thing we're going to do here is create a reflection, for these buttons. I'm going to do that by selecting all of our groups here and dragging them down to the new layer icon. So I've just duplicated all of my groups, so you can see my Layers palette has gotten significantly larger. I'm now going to right click on these groups and hit merge layers, and I've now merged all of those groups into one exact duplicate of all of these buttons. I'm going to drag this down to the bottom, so now this is just sitting right above this background glow. Matter of fact, I'm going to name that layer glow. And I'm going to hit Command or Control T to free transform them, and I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to hit flip vertical. Apply those changes. I'm hitting V to move back to my move tool. I'm going to nudge these down and just set them right below them, just like that. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I'm going to select Apply Mask. So now they disappear because we just applied a black mask. I'm going to grab the rectangular marquee tool and make a selection that goes 4 or 5 pixels above our guide and goes all the way to the bottom of the document. I'm going to grab the gradient tool, make sure it's set to black to white gradient. And as long as black is the color over on the left, we're going to click down at the bottom, hold down Shift to make sure you're drawing a perfectly straight line with the gradient tool, and just draw up to just a couple pixels below our guide. And you're going to see, I just hit Command and Control D, which deselected. What that did was it fades now our icon reflections out. So they start at 100% opacity and they disappear. I have a entirely other video you can watch on masks. But that's what's happening here. We're going to select this layer, and we're going to reduce the opacity to, let's try 35. And 35 looks good, just like that. So, just like that, we have created a navigation bar. This navigation bar is ready to be sliced up and exported and used out on the web somewhere. I'll reduce it back to 100%, and that's what it would look like if you saw it on the web minus that guide. We can get rid of the guide by coming up here to View, Clear Guides, and that's what it would look like right there. So that's it. We've created this navigation bar and made these web icons as well. I hope you learned something from this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and please go check out the site. The site is www.tutvid.com. Thanks for watching.